6 months after the divorce scandal, the Duke received a sealed letter. She bore you an heir. Winter descended upon Ravencourt Hall with merciless grace, coating the ancient stones in frost and casting long shadows across the empty corridors. The Duke of Blackmere, Alaric Vane, stood before the roaring hearth in his study, a solitary figure framed by leaping flames. His tall frame remained rigid as he stared into the fire, the glow reflecting in his steel-grey eyes, now dulled by months of isolation. "Your Grace," murmured Hadley, his butler of 20 years, appearing at the threshold with practiced silence. "A messenger has arrived with correspondence requiring your immediate attention." The Duke did not turn. "Place it with the others. I beg your pardon, Your Grace, but the messenger insisted upon its urgency." Hadley's voice held an unusual tremor. "It bears a seal I have not witnessed in some months." At this, Alaric's shoulders tensed beneath the fine wool of his evening coat. 6 months had passed since the scandal had ripped through London society like wildfire. 6 months since Lady Isolde Merrow, once Duchess of Blackmere, had been banished from court, her name no longer spoken within these walls. "From whom does it come?" The Duke's voice emerged low, controlled, betraying nothing of the sudden quickening of his pulse. "Lady Seraphine Doran, Your Grace." A bitter laugh escaped Alaric's lips. "Lady Doran presumes much to address me after her role in my wife's disgrace." "Former wife, Your Grace," Hadley corrected gently, offering a small silver tray, upon which rested a letter sealed with pale blue wax, split precisely down the center. The room fell silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Even the ancient timepiece, marking the seconds with relentless precision, seemed to hold its breath. "Leave it," the Duke commanded, "and leave me." When the door closed, Alaric approached the tray as one might approach a viper. The blue wax, Isolde's color, the shade of her eyes in certain light. His fingers trembled imperceptibly as he lifted the missive, breaking the seal with a decisive snap that echoed in the cavernous chamber. The letter contained but 3 lines, written in Lady Doran's precise hand. "She bore you an heir. The boy lives. He deserves his father's name." The parchment slipped from his grasp, drifting to the carpet like autumn's last leaf. For 6 months the Duke had fortified himself against memory, against regret. He had sealed himself within these walls as surely as this letter had been sealed, with ceremony, with finality. "Impossible," he whispered to the empty room, yet even as the word left his lips, the calculations formed in his mind unbidden. The timing, the last night before the accusations, before the trial, before he had chosen his family's honor over the woman who had pledged herself to him. Alaric crossed to the window, drawing back the heavy velvet drapes. Beyond, the grounds of Ravencourt lay hushed under moonlight, the formal gardens traced in silver frost. In the distance, the chapel where they had wed stood silent and reproachful. "An heir," he breathed, the words forming clouds in the cold air, seeping through the ancient glass. For generations, the Dukes of Blackmere had been charged with one sacred duty: to preserve the bloodline, to ensure succession. And in his pride, in his wounded vanity, he had cast away the very vessel of that continuation. Memories assaulted him. Isolde's pale face as the judgment was read, her eyes dry but hollowed by betrayal. The whispers that had followed her from the courtroom, the silence of the household when he had returned alone. "What have I done?" The question emerged not as the commanding tone of a duke, but as the broken whisper of a man confronting his gravest error. Behind him, the fire snapped suddenly, and Alaric turned to see the blue seal had fallen into the flames. It curled, blackened, then vanished, an omen or absolution he could not tell. Dawn would find him still standing at that window, the letter clutched in his hand, as the first light revealed a world transformed by a single truth. Somewhere beyond Ravencourt's walls, his child drew breath. The carriage bearing the Duke of Blackmere thundered along the coastal road, its wheels throwing mud and sleet in violent arcs. Inside, Alaric gripped the leather strap as the vehicle swayed, his jaw set with determination that masked the turmoil beneath. He had departed without ceremony, without entourage, a fact that would set the servants' quarters ablaze with whispers. "Your Grace, we approach Brionne," announced the driver through the small partition, his voice nearly lost to the howling wind. "The village lies just beyond the next rise." Brionne, a place of no consequence, a fishing hamlet clinging to the jagged coastline like a barnacle to stone. That Isolde would retreat to such obscurity spoke volumes of her desperation, her need to vanish from the society that had condemned her. As the carriage crested the hill, the sea stretched before him, vast, grey and churning beneath an equally tumultuous sky. The village below consisted of stone cottages, huddled against the elements, smoke from their chimneys twisted by the relentless wind. "Which dwelling, your grace?" the driver called. Alaric withdrew Lady Doran's second letter from his breast pocket, delivered as he had prepared to depart. "The stone cottage at the far edge of the village, the one with the blue door." Blue, always blue with Isolde. The colour of loyalty, she had once told him. The irony did not escape him. The carriage halted before a modest structure set apart from its neighbours, its garden dormant for winter, yet still showing signs of careful tending. A blue door, faded now, weathered by salt and storm, stood closed against the world. Alaric descended without waiting for assistance, his boots sinking into the sodden earth. He stood motionless, suddenly aware of his own reckless impulse. What right had he to appear at her door after all that had transpired? What words could possibly bridge the chasm his pride had carved between them? Before he could retreat to the shelter of doubt, the door opened. A silver-haired woman emerged, her sharp features arranged in an expression of careful neutrality. Lady Seraphine Doran, once the brightest star of 3 seasons, now self-appointed guardian to the woman he had cast aside. "Your Grace," she intoned, the title lacking its customary deference, "you have travelled with uncommon haste." "Where is she?" Alaric demanded, forsaking formality. "Within," Lady Doran replied, making no move to admit him. "Though I wonder if your presence will bring comfort or merely reopen wounds best left to their healing." The Duke drew himself up, his full height imposing even against the backdrop of the churning sea. "I did not journey here to debate propriety with you, Lady Doran. I have come to see my wife." "Former wife," she corrected, echoing his butler's words with far more venom. "As you so publicly declared before God and the Crown." A cutting wind sliced between them, carrying with it the distant toll of the village chapel bell. 1, 2, 3 solemn notes, marking the hour with indifferent precision. "I would see her," Alaric repeated, his voice softening despite himself. "And the child." Something in his tone, vulnerability perhaps, or the raw edge of regret, caused Lady Doran's expression to shift. She studied him with the shrewd assessment of one who had navigated treacherous social waters for decades. "She does not expect you," she said at last, "nor I think did she wish for my intervention, but what's done cannot be undone." She stepped aside, gesturing him within. "Tread lightly, Your Grace. She is not the same woman you abandoned to scandal's mercy." The cottage interior enveloped him in unexpected warmth. A fire burned steadily in the hearth, casting amber light across simple furnishings. Books lined the walls, and the scent of lavender hung in the air, achingly familiar. This modest dwelling contained more genuine comfort than the cavernous halls of Ravencourt. "She is by the window," Lady Doran murmured, indicating a doorway before disappearing down a narrow corridor. Alaric removed his hat, suddenly conscious of the mud on his boots, the disorder of his appearance after the hasty journey. He had not paused to consider how he might look upon arriving, a thought that would have been inconceivable to the man he was 6 months prior. He stepped through the doorway, and there she was, Isolde Merrow, former Duchess of Blackmere, standing beside a salt-streaked window that framed the turbulent sea beyond. Her back was to him, her posture as elegant as ever, though perhaps thinner than he remembered. Her hair, once elaborately arranged by ladies' maids, fell in a simple silver-blonde plait down her back. "I did not believe you would come," she said without turning, her voice carrying above the distant crash of waves. "I told Seraphine as much when she confessed to sending the letter. Yet here I stand," Alaric replied, unable to formulate a more eloquent response in her presence. "Indeed." She turned then, and the sight of her face stole the breath from his lungs. Still beautiful, painfully so, but altered. The softness had gone from her features, replaced by a serene dignity that seemed to render her untouchable. Though to what purpose, I cannot fathom. In her arms, she held a bundle wrapped in soft blue wool. From within, a small sound emerged, neither cry nor laughter, but something between, a questioning murmur at the presence of a stranger. "The purpose," Alaric said, his eyes fixed on the bundle, "is there in your arms." Silence stretched between them, taut as a ship's sail before storm winds. Isolde's gaze remained steady, unflinching in its assessment of the man who had once been her husband. The Duke of Blackmere, whose very name had opened every door in London society, now stood uncertain upon her threshold. "May I see him?" Alaric finally asked, his voice stripped of its customary command. Isolde considered him with cool deliberation. "You surrendered that right in the courtroom, did you not? Let all records show that I renounce all claims and connections to Lady Isolde Merrow." Your words precisely, I believe. The child in her arms stirred, tiny fists emerging from the blue wool wrappings. With practiced ease, she adjusted her hold, her attention momentarily diverted to the infant's needs. I did not know, Alaric said, the admission costing him dearly. Would it have altered your judgment? Isolde countered. Would the knowledge of his existence have stayed your hand when you signed the papers that severed our union? The Duke had no answer that would not compound his shame. Instead, he took a tentative step forward, drawn by an instinct more powerful than pride. What have you named him? A flicker of something crossed Isolde's features, perhaps surprise at the gentleness in his tone. Lucien, she replied. It means light, for he came into this world when all else had darkened. Lucien, Alaric repeated, the name settling in his heart with unexpected weight. A noble name. A name chosen without consultation or permission, she reminded him, but the edge in her voice had softened imperceptibly. As was necessary, the infant, Lucien, chose that moment to turn his face toward the sound of his father's voice. Eyes of startling clarity regarded Alaric with the innocent curiosity unique to the very young. The Duke felt his carefully maintained composure fracture at the sight of features so unmistakably blended of their bloodlines, his own stubborn chin, Isolde's delicate brow. He has your eyes, Alaric observed, unable to disguise the wonder in his voice. And your temperament, heaven help us both, Isolde replied, a ghost of humor briefly animating her features. He brooks no argument and demands attention with the certainty of one born to command. The wind howled suddenly against the cottage, rattling the window panes. Lucien startled at the sound, his face crumpling in preparation for protest. Without thought, Alaric moved closer. May I hold him? The request emerged not as the entitled demand of a duke, but as the humble petition of a man confronting his own mortality through the miracle of continuation. Isolde hesitated, her arms tightening protectively around her son. For a moment Alaric believed she would refuse, a refusal he had no right to contest. Instead, with slow deliberation, she extended the bundle toward him. Support his head thus, she instructed, her fingers brushing Alaric's as she transferred the precious weight. He dislikes to be confined too tightly. The sensation of holding his son, this fragile, perfect being who owed his existence to a love now fractured beyond repair, rendered the Duke speechless. Lucien regarded him solemnly, tiny fingers flexing in the air between them as though reaching for connection. He knows you, Isolde murmured, watching their interaction with an expression Alaric could not interpret. Though how that can be, I cannot say. Blood recognizes blood, Alaric replied, recalling his grandmother's words from childhood. The ancient duchess had possessed wisdom that transcended social convention, a quality he had failed to value until too late. Lucien yawned suddenly, his entire being committed to the gesture, before settling contentedly against Alaric's chest. The trust inherent in the action struck the Duke with the force of physical blow. I have wronged you beyond measure, he said, raising his eyes to meet Isolde's gaze. Both of you. She did not contradict him nor offer facile absolution. Instead, she moved to the hearth, adding a log to the flames with practiced efficiency. Why have you come, Alaric? Truly? The use of his given name, the first time he had heard it from her lips in 6 months, rendered him momentarily speechless. When he found his voice again, he spoke with an honesty foreign to his nature. I came because I had to see with my own eyes what my pride had wrought, he admitted. I came because in all the empty grandeur of Ravencourt, there is nothing of consequence, nothing that matters as this child matters. And what do you intend now? Isolde asked, straightening to face him. Having seen him, will you return to your life of privilege, perhaps sending funds at Christmas and on his birthday? Will you acknowledge him publicly, or shall he remain your secret shame? Her questions struck with precision, laying bare the inadequacy of his hasty journey, his lack of forethought beyond the desperate need to see the truth Lady Doran's letter had revealed. I intend, Alaric began, then faltered. The child in his arms slumbered peacefully, unaware of the precipice upon which his future balanced. I intend to make right what I have destroyed, if you will permit it. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending a shower of sparks upward. The light caught in Isolde's hair, illuminating the silver strands among the gold, evidence of suffering he had inflicted. And how does a Duke of the Realm propose to restore what his own testimony shattered? She asked, her voice barely audible above the fire's gentle roar. Before Alaric could respond, the cottage door opened. Lady Doran appeared, carrying a tray laden with tea things, her expression making clear she had been listening. "Perhaps," she interjected, setting the tray upon a small table, "this conversation might benefit from fortification. The journey from Ravencourt is arduous in fair weather. In winter it tests even the hardiest constitution." The mundane ritual of tea service provided momentary reprieve from the charged atmosphere. Alaric reluctantly surrendered Lucienne back to Isolde's care, the absence of the child's weight leaving him strangely bereft. "You must stay the night at least," Lady Doran announced with the authority of one accustomed to managing difficult social situations. "The road will be impassable by nightfall, and the village inn is hardly suitable for one of your station." "I require no special accommodation," Alaric replied, surprising himself with the sincerity of the statement. "Nevertheless," Lady Doran continued, "propriety demands certain arrangements. I shall prepare the guest chamber." With that she exited, leaving them once again in uneasy solitude. "You need not remain," Isolde said, settling Lucienne in a cradle beside the hearth. "We have managed these 6 months without assistance. We shall continue to do so." The quiet dignity of her declaration humbled Alaric more thoroughly than any courtroom judgment. "I do not doubt your capability," he responded. "I question only my right to depart again, now knowing what I know." Isolde's hand lingered on the edge of the cradle, her fingers tracing the simple carved wood. "Rights," she mused, the word weighted with irony. How quickly they dissolve when weighed against reputation, how easily discarded when inconvenient. Morning arrived at the coastal cottage, with tentative light filtering through the salt-stained windows. Alaric had passed a restless night in the sparse guest chamber, his thoughts churning like the sea beyond the cliffs. The narrow bed, the woolen blankets, so unlike the opulent furnishings of Ravencourt, had provided him no comfort. Yet as dawn broke, he found a strange peace in the simplicity surrounding him. He emerged to discover Isolde in the small kitchen, Lucienne cradled in one arm, while she prepared tea with practiced efficiency. The domesticity of the scene struck him with unexpected force. This woman who had once presided over formal dinners for diplomats and royalty now moved with quiet grace through far humbler tasks. "You have risen early, Your Grace," she observed, not turning to face him. "Alaric," he corrected gently. "Surely here, if nowhere else, we might dispense with formalities." She paused, then inclined her head slightly. "As you wish." A thin cry rose from the bundle in her arms, and Lucienne's tiny fist emerged from the blankets, waving with surprising determination. Isolde adjusted her hold with the practiced ease of a mother who had learned her craft without the benefit of nursemaids or governesses. "He is hungry," she explained, reaching for a small prepared bottle. "Would you—" She hesitated, then continued with careful neutrality. "Would you care to feed him while I complete breakfast preparations?" The offer, simple yet profound, struck Alaric with the weight of unexpected privilege. "I would," he replied, moving forward with uncharacteristic hesitation, "though I fear my inexperience may prove detrimental." A ghost of a smile touched Isolde's lips, the first he had witnessed since his arrival. "Lucienne is remarkably forgiving of awkwardness, provided his sustenance is not delayed over long." She transferred the child to his arms, demonstrating the proper position for feeding. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, a momentary contact that sent an echo of memory through Alaric's chest. How casually they had once touched, hands clasped across dinner tables, fingers interlaced during carriage rides, bodies entwined in the sanctuary of their marriage bed. Lucienne accepted the bottle with enthusiastic determination, regarding his father with solemn eyes as he drank. Alaric found himself transfixed by the perfect miniature features, the delicate eyelashes, the firm chin that mirrored his own, the tiny crease between eyebrows that appeared when concentration deepened. "He has your focus," Alaric observed softly, "that intent regard that misses nothing." Isolde glanced over from where she sliced bread. "And your stubbornness," she replied, her tone hovering between accusation and reluctant amusement. "Once his mind is set upon a course, nothing will dissuade him." The conversation lapsed into silence, broken only by the contented sounds of Lucien's feeding and the rhythmic slide of knife against bread. Outside, the winter morning revealed itself in gradual increments, gulls calling over the slate-grey sea, village bells marking the half-hour, the distant creak of fishing boats preparing for the day's labor. Lady Doran entered, already dressed for the day, her silver hair arranged with impeccable precision despite their remote location. "I see His Grace has assumed paternal duties with commendable alacrity," she remarked, her tone carrying a note of surprised approval. "Instinct rather than skill," Alaric demurred, his gaze still fixed upon his son. Indeed. Lady Doran accepted a cup of tea from Isolde. One might argue that certain instincts lie dormant until circumstances demand their awakening. The subtle reproof in her words was not lost on Alaric. Once such impertinence from a social inferior would have earned immediate censure. Now, surrounded by the evidence of his gravest error, he found he had neither the right nor desire to assert his rank. Lucian finished his meal with a small sigh of contentment. Alaric shifted him carefully to his shoulder, as he had observed Isolde do, patting the tiny back with cautious gentleness. "You learn quickly," Isolde commented, setting a simple breakfast upon the table. "Though perhaps that should not surprise me. You always possessed a remarkable capacity to master whatever you set your mind to accomplish." The words, delivered without inflection, nonetheless carried the weight of their shared past. His single-minded pursuit of her during their courtship, his meticulous attention to estate management, his ruthless efficiency in dissolving their marriage when scandal threatened the vain legacy. "Not all that I have mastered has been worthy of the effort," Alaric replied, the admission unfamiliar on his tongue. "Pride most of all." The child upon his shoulder offered a tiny burp, as though providing punctuation to his father's confession. Isolde's lips quirked in response, before she quickly schooled her expression to neutrality. "Come," she said, gesturing to the table. "Eat before it grows cold. The mornings here hold more chill than you are accustomed to at Ravencourt." The meal was simple: bread, butter, preserves and eggs, yet Alaric found himself consuming it with greater appreciation than the elaborate breakfasts prepared by Ravencourt's French chef. Perhaps hunger born of emotional upheaval had sharpened his appetite. Or perhaps the unadorned honesty of the food matched the growing clarity within his thoughts. "I must journey to the village this morning," Isolde announced as they finished. "There are supplies needed, and Dr. Merriweather promised to call to examine Lucien. His fever has subsided, but vigilance remains prudent." "Fever?" Alaric's concern flared instantly. "You mentioned no illness." "There was no opportunity among more pressing matters," Isolde replied evenly. "It was minor, though concerning for one so young. The worst has passed." The realization that his son had faced even minor peril while he remained ignorant in the comfort of Ravencourt struck Alaric with fresh guilt. What other milestones, trials and moments had he forfeited through his pride? "I shall accompany you to the village," he declared, attempting to temper the ducal command in his tone. Isolde raised an eyebrow. "You will create quite a stir. The Duke of Blackmere strolling through our humble market will provide gossip for months to come." "Let them speak," Alaric responded, surprised by his own indifference to public opinion, the very thing he had once valued above all else. "I would see where my son is being raised. I would know his world, even if briefly." Lady Doran observed this exchange with shrewd assessment. Perhaps his grace might also consider what explanations he intends to offer when inevitably questioned about his presence here. Brion may be removed from London society, but tongues wag no less vigorously for their provincial location. The question struck at the heart of Alaric's dilemma. He had journeyed to Brion on impulse, driven by the shocking revelation of his son's existence, yet had formed no coherent plan beyond bearing witness to what his actions had wrought. "I need no explanation beyond truth," he replied at last, addressing Isolde rather than Lady Doran. "I have come to see my son. What follows must be determined between ourselves, not dictated by social expectation." Isolde studied him with the careful scrutiny that had once unsettled him in their earliest encounters, a gaze that seemed to penetrate beyond the careful facade he presented to the world. "Truth," she echoed softly. "How novel an approach for the Duke of Blackmere." The subtle barb found its mark, but Alaric acknowledged its justice with a slight incline of his head. "Novel indeed," he agreed, "though perhaps overdue." Lucien, still nestled against his father's shoulder, chose that moment to reach up with determined fingers and grasp Alaric's cravat, crumpling the immaculate folds that his valet would have defended with martial vigor. Lady Doran did not quite disguise her smile. "I believe the young master has rendered his opinion on excessive formality." For the first time since his arrival, Alaric felt the tension within him ease fractionally. He looked down at his son, who gazed back with serene confidence in his right to disarrange ducal attire. "Like his mother," Alaric murmured, "he sees through pretense with remarkable clarity." The village of Brion revealed itself in stark contrast to the manicured elegance of London society. Here, life proceeded not according to social seasons and carefully orchestrated entertainments, but by the eternal rhythms of tide and weather. Fishermen mended nets with calloused hands, women haggled over the price of winter vegetables with practical determination, and children darted between stalls with the ungoverned energy of those not yet constrained by class distinction. Alaric walked beside Isolde through the market square, acutely aware of the curious glances cast in their direction. His greatcoat, though he had selected his plainest for the journey, still marked him unmistakably as a man of wealth and position. Beside him, Isolde carried Lucienne in a sling across her chest, her simple blue cloak drawing no particular notice, save for its association with the striking gentleman at her side. "Mrs. Merrow," called a robust woman from behind a stall laden with root vegetables. "Your usual, is it? I've saved some particularly fine parsnips for you." "Thank you, Mrs. Hadley," Isolde replied with easy familiarity. "That would be most welcome." Alaric observed this exchange with quiet fascination. Mrs. Merrow, she had reverted to her family name, of course, yet hearing it spoken so casually by a market vendor drove home the reality of her altered circumstances. This woman, who had once been addressed as Your Grace by servants and aristocracy alike, now navigated a world where she was known simply by her surname. "And the little one?" Mrs. Hadley continued, leaning forward to peer at Lucienne. "Has his cough improved with that syrup, doctor?" "Merriweather prescribed?" "Considerably," Isolde confirmed, adjusting the blanket around Lucienne's face to shield him from the brisk coastal wind, though he remains somewhat fractious at night. "Fennel tea in his evening bottle," the woman advised, with the confidence of one who had raised numerous offspring. "Works wonders for my grandchildren." Her gaze shifted to Alaric, curiosity evident in her ruddy features. "And who might this gentleman be, if I may make so bold?" Isolde hesitated, a barely perceptible pause that nonetheless communicated volumes to Alaric. How should she introduce him? As Lucien's father, the man who had publicly renounced her, the Duke whose title she had once shared. "An old acquaintance from London," she replied at last, her tone pleasantly non-committal, "visiting briefly on business matters." The half-truth settled awkwardly between them as they moved through the market, repeating variations of the same exchange at each stall. Alaric found himself simultaneously impressed by Isolde's composed navigation of these social waters and discomfited by his reduction to acquaintance, though what more could he reasonably expect? As they approached the apothecary shop, a small disturbance caught their attention. A group of village boys had surrounded an older man whose fine clothes marked him as similarly out of place in Brionne. "Please, gentlemen, some decorum," the man was saying, his refined accent audible even from a distance. "I merely inquire as to the whereabouts of a certain residence." "Fancy talk won't help you here, Governor," one of the bolder boys replied, mimicking the man's cultured tones with exaggerated flourish. "Penny for directions, that's our rate." Isolde sighed softly. "Mr. Halloway encounters this treatment whenever he journeys from London," she explained to Alaric. "The village children view any well-dressed visitor as fair game for their mischief." Without waiting for response, she called out, "James Thornley, would your mother approve of such behavior toward her solicitor, the very man who assisted with your grandfather's estate?" The ringleader turned, his expression shifting from impudence to chagrin at Isolde's intervention. "Mrs. Merrow, we was just having a bit of fun, is all." "We're having," she corrected gently but firmly, "and I suggest you find more appropriate amusement elsewhere before I feel compelled to mention this incident to Reverend Clark." The threat of clerical intervention proved sufficient to disperse the young troublemakers, who scattered with the fluid grace of a school of fish sensing danger. The gentleman adjusted his spectacles with evident relief. "My dear Lady Isle," he caught himself glancing briefly at Alaric. "Mrs. Merrow, your timely intervention is most appreciated." "Mr. Halloway," Isolde acknowledged with a small nod, "what brings you to Brionne? I received no notice of your intended visit." "Urgent matters requiring personal attention," the solicitor replied, his gaze now fixed upon Alaric with growing recognition. "Though I see I am perhaps redundant in my mission." Understanding dawned. This man, clearly a legal representative, had some connection to Isolde's current circumstances, and his appearance so soon after Alaric's arrival could not be coincidence. "You know of my presence here," the Duke stated, rather than asked. "Indeed, Your Grace," Mr. Halloway confirmed with a deferential bow. "Lady Doran dispatched a messenger to my offices in London immediately upon your departure from Ravencourt. I set out forthwith, though winter roads slowed my progress considerably." Isolde's expression had grown still, the careful neutrality she had maintained throughout the morning giving way to evident concern. Whatever legal matters you believe require attention, Mr. Halloway, they can surely wait until we have returned to the cottage. The market square is hardly the venue for such discussions. Of course, the solicitor agreed hastily. I merely wished to ensure all parties were present before proceeding with the necessary documentation. Documentation? Alaric inquired, a sense of foreboding rising within him. What precisely has Lady Doran set in motion? Mr. Halloway adjusted his spectacles nervously. Perhaps, as Mrs. Merrow suggests, these matters are best addressed in more private surroundings. The remainder of their market excursion proceeded with palpable tension. Isolde completed her purchases with efficient haste, her earlier ease replaced by guarded preoccupation. Alaric found himself carrying her market basket, an oddly domestic task that would have been unthinkable in his previous life. As they made their way back along the coastal path, Lucienne began to fuss, tiny sounds of discomfort that grew increasingly insistent. The wind had risen, bringing with it the bite of approaching winter storms. He grows cold, Isolde murmured, adjusting the blanket more securely around the infant. We must hasten our return. Without conscious thought, Alaric removed his woolen scarf and offered it to her. This might provide additional protection from the wind. She hesitated, then accepted the garment, wrapping it carefully around Lucien's small form. The Duke's insignia, embroidered in one corner of the fine wool, rested visible against the child's cheek, a stark visual representation of the bloodline that connected them regardless of legal declarations. Mr. Halloway, huffing slightly as he kept pace with their quickened steps, observed this exchange with evident interest. I must say, the young master bears a striking resemblance to your side of the family, Your Grace. The vein profile is quite distinctive. Mr. Halloway, Isolde interjected with quiet firmness, whatever Lady Doran has communicated to you regarding this situation, I would remind you that no formal acknowledgement has yet been made. The solicitor blinked in confusion. But surely the Duke's presence here indicates nothing beyond a private visitation, she completed for him. Legal matters of the gravity you imply require considerably more deliberation than a single day's acquaintance can provide. Alaric felt the familiar sting of her words, the subtle reminder that his appearance after 6 months of absence granted him no automatic rights to the child he had unwittingly abandoned. Yet he could not dispute the justice of her position. What had he imagined would result from this impulsive journey? That she would simply acquiesce to whatever arrangements he proposed after half a year of silence. The cottage appeared before them, smoke rising from its chimney in reassurance of warmth within. Lady Doran stood at the threshold, her expression shifting from satisfaction at the sight of Mr. Halloway to mild alarm as she noted the tension evident in Isolde's bearing. "You've met our legal representative," she observed unnecessarily. "Excellent. Then we may proceed without delay." "We shall proceed with nothing until I have properly fed and settled Lucienne," Isolde replied, her tone brooking no argument as she swept past Lady Doran into the cottage. Left standing awkwardly at the doorstep, Alaric found himself oddly aligned with Isolde in this moment of resistance against whatever scheme Lady Doran had orchestrated. Despite his title, his wealth, his lifelong assumption of control, he recognized that here in this coastal refuge, power resided not with him, but with the woman who had built a life from the ruins he had created. "Perhaps, Lady Doran," he suggested with careful diplomacy, "it would be prudent to explain exactly what documentation you have instructed Mr. Halloway to prepare before we engage further in legal matters." The cottage sitting room crackled with tension, as palpable as the fire in the hearth. Lady Doran occupied the sole armchair like a queen holding informal court, while Mr. Halloway arranged papers on the small writing desk with methodical precision. Alaric stood by the window, watching as the first flakes of snow began to drift past the glass, an ill omen for travel plans, yet he found himself strangely unconcerned by the prospect of extended confinement within these walls. Isolde entered, having settled Lucienne for his afternoon rest. Her composed expression revealed nothing of her thoughts, though the slight tension at the corners of her mouth betrayed her unease. "Now," Lady Doran began without preamble, "let us address the matter directly. Your Grace has journeyed here upon learning of young Lucien's existence. Presumably this indicates some intention regarding the child's future and standing." "Seraphine," Isolde cautioned, her use of the older woman's given name underlining their intimate connection, "you overstep. Whatever presumptions you harbor regarding His Grace's intentions, they remain precisely that. Presumptions not declarations. Alaric studied Isolde with renewed appreciation. The quiet deference she had shown during their marriage, a quality he had mistaken for passivity, had transformed into a steely resolve that commanded respect even from those who ostensibly outranked her. "If I may," Mr. Halloway interjected, lifting a document from his neatly arranged stack. "Lady Doran has instructed me to prepare papers acknowledging paternity and establishing inheritance rights for the minor child, Lucian Alexander Merrow." "Alexander," Alaric echoed, the middle name striking him with unexpected force. His own name, passed through generations of vain dukes, now bestowed upon his son, despite their separation. Isolde met his gaze steadily. He deserved something of his father, even if merely a name. The simple statement, delivered without sentiment or accusation, pierced Alaric more effectively than any reproach. She had honored his lineage, even as society had compelled her to abandon his protection. "The documentation," Mr. Halloway continued, oblivious to the charged exchange, "would legally establish the child as your Grace's acknowledged heir, with all attendant rights and privileges, while maintaining Mrs. Merrow's primary guardianship." "Primary guardianship?" Alaric questioned, focusing on the solicitor once more. "You imply divided authority." Lady Doran leaned forward slightly. "Surely you recognize the impossibility of the current arrangement, Your Grace. A duke's heir raised in obscurity, denied his birthright and position. The scandal of your divorce pales in comparison to the potential outcry should word spread that the Blackmere succession has been left to languish in a coastal village." "I have never considered my son languishing," Isolde replied, her tone cool. "Nor do I equate his worth with titles or inheritances." "Noble sentiment, my dear," Lady Doran countered, "but impractical in execution. The boy is a Vane by blood, regardless of the circumstances surrounding his birth. That fact carries obligations that transcend personal feelings." Alaric felt the familiar pressure of dynastic expectations closing around him like a vice. How often had similar arguments dominated his decisions? The unending refrain of obligation to lineage, to history, to the abstract concept of family honor. Yet now, having witnessed the tangible reality of his son, warm breathing, utterly innocent of the social complexities surrounding his existence, those abstractions seemed suddenly hollow. "What precisely do these documents propose?" he asked, addressing Mr. Halloway directly. The solicitor cleared his throat. "In essence, Your Grace, they establish a formal acknowledgement of paternity, secure inheritance rights for young Master Lucian, provide financial settlements for his upbringing, and outline a shared guardianship arrangement whereby the child would divide his time between Mrs. Merrow's custody and Ravencourt Hall upon reaching a suitable age, perhaps 4 or 5 years." "Divide his time?" Isolde repeated, the first crack appearing in her composed facade. "You propose to separate me from my son?" "Not permanently," Lady Doran hastened to clarify, "merely to ensure he receives the education and social introduction befitting his station. Surely you recognize the advantages this would provide." "I recognize a proposal that treats my child as a possession to be allocated according to social convenience," Isolde responded, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "Lucien is not yet 6 months old. Any discussion of removing him from my care, however partially or temporarily, is premature at best and cruel at worst." Alaric found himself unexpectedly aligned with her position. The thought of disrupting the secure world she had created for their son, however modest by aristocratic standards, struck him as unnecessary and potentially harmful. "Mr. Halloway," he said, his tone measured, "while I appreciate the thoroughness of your preparation, I believe these arrangements require significant reconsideration." The solicitor blinked in evident surprise. "But Lady Doran assured me your Grace would find these terms most advantageous." "Lady Doran," Alaric replied with the subtle edge that had once silenced diplomatic negotiations, "has perhaps presumed to know my mind better than I know it myself." The older woman met his gaze unflinchingly. "I presumed only that you would act in accordance with your position and responsibilities, Your Grace. The Vane succession has never been treated with casualness, nor is it being treated casually now," he countered. "But decisions of this magnitude cannot be rushed into existence through legal documents prepared without consultation with the parties most intimately affected." Isolde regarded him with an expression he could not quite interpret, surprise mingled with cautious reassessment, as though she were seeing him through new eyes. "What do you propose instead, Your Grace?" Mr. Halloway inquired, Clearly discomfited by this unexpected deviation from his instructions, Alaric crossed to where Isolde stood and, after a moment's hesitation, positioned himself beside her, a physical declaration of alignment that escaped no one's notice. "I propose that Mrs. Merrow and I discuss these matters privately, without the pressure of immediate legal commitments. Once we have reached accord, we shall inform you of our decisions." The silence that followed resonated with the subtle shift in power dynamics. Lady Doran's features betrayed momentary displeasure before settling into reluctant acquiescence. Mr. Holloway merely nodded, gathering his papers with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to navigating the capricious wishes of his aristocratic clients. "Perhaps," Isolde suggested with quiet authority, "you might call again tomorrow, Mr. Holloway. The weather appears to be worsening, and I would not have you risk the coastal road as darkness falls." "Most considerate, Mrs. Merrow," the solicitor acknowledged, casting an apprehensive glance toward the window where snow now fell in earnest. "I shall secure lodging at the village inn and await your summons." As Lady Doran accompanied Mr. Holloway to the door, Isolde turned to Alaric. "That was unexpected," she said softly, ensuring their conversation remained private. "You disapprove?" he asked, studying her face for clues to her thoughts. "I am surprised," she amended. "The Duke of Blackmere I knew would never have delayed legal proceedings that secured his interests." The observation, delivered without rancor, nonetheless illuminated the vast distance between the man he had been 6 months ago and the man standing before her now. "Perhaps," Alaric replied carefully, "the Duke of Blackmere you knew has discovered interests beyond those recognized by society or secured by legal documentation." From the nursery adjoining the sitting room came the soft sounds of Lucien stirring from his rest. Isolde's attention immediately shifted, maternal instinct overriding all other considerations. "He wakes early," she murmured. "The excitement of visitors has disrupted his routine." "May I accompany you?" Alaric asked, the request tentative despite his rank and title. The question hung between them, simple in its phrasing yet profound in its implications. This was no formal visitation governed by etiquette manuals or social precedent. This was a father requesting permission to witness the ordinary miracle of his child's awakening. After a moment that stretched like eternity, Isolde nodded. "Come," she said simply, leading the way toward the nursery door. "He is at his most amiable upon first waking, before hunger asserts its demands." As they entered the small chamber where Lucien lay blinking sleepily in his cradle, Alaric felt something within him shift irrevocably, a realignment of priorities more profound than any caused by scandal or social pressure. The elaborate architecture of his former existence, built upon obligation, expectation, and rigid adherence to aristocratic code, began to crumble, replaced by a structure both simpler and more enduring. Beyond the window, snow continued to fall, encasing the cottage in white silence. By morning, the roads would be impassable. Ravencourt would continue without its master for days to come. For the first time in his life, Alaric found he did not mind being exactly where circumstances had placed him. Dawn illuminated a transformed landscape. Snow blanketed the coastal village, softening the rugged contours of cliff and cottage alike beneath pristine white. Isolde stood at the kitchen window, cradling a cup of tea between her palms, watching as early light cast rose-gold reflections across the frozen scene. "The road to London will be impassable for at least 3 days, she observed as Alaric entered. "Perhaps longer if the snow continues." He approached, standing beside her at a distance both respectful and intimate. "I have dispatched a messenger to Ravencourt. My household will manage in my absence." The unspoken implication that the mighty machinery of his ducal estate would continue functioning without him hung between them. 6 months ago, such a prolonged, unplanned absence would have been unthinkable. The Duke of Blackmere did not simply disappear from his responsibilities on personal whims. "Lady Doran seems quite determined regarding Lucien's future," Isolde remarked, changing the subject with deliberate care. "Seraphine has always possessed an overdeveloped sense of what is proper," Alaric replied, accepting the cup of tea she offered, "though in this instance her concern stems from genuine affection for you both, however misguided her methods." Isolde's eyebrow arched slightly. "You defend her? After she orchestrated legal proceedings without your knowledge?" "I understand her," he clarified. "She witnessed your suffering after the divorce and seeks to ensure Lucien does not bear the consequences of my error." The acknowledgement, simple yet profound, settled between them like the snow outside. transformative, hushing the harsh edges of their shared past. "She wrote to you about Lucien without my permission," Isolde said after a moment. "I had not decided if I would ever inform you of his existence." The quiet admission struck Alaric with unexpected force. The possibility that he might never have known his son sent a chill through him more penetrating than the winter air seeping through ancient window panes. "Would you truly have kept him from me?" he asked, unable to entirely mask the pain in his voice. Isolde met his gaze directly, her eyes clear and uncompromising. "I do not know," she answered with honesty that bordered on cruelty. "When you severed our marriage, you made your priorities abundantly clear. Your family name, your reputation, your standing in society, all valued above the woman who stood beside you for 5 years. I believed the accusations," Alaric said softly. "God help me, Isolde. I believed you had betrayed our vows." "Without granting me the dignity of defense," she reminded him, "without questioning the sources of such convenient slander." A log shifted in the hearth, sending sparks upward in a momentary flurry of gold. From the nursery came Lucien's soft morning sounds, not yet cries but the gentle vocalizations of an infant greeting the day. "I will tend to him," Isolde said, setting aside her tea. "There is porridge warming if you desire breakfast." Alaric caught her hand as she moved to pass him, the contact sending an echo of their former intimacy through the room. "Isolde," he said, her name a plea more than an address. "I was wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong." She did not withdraw from his touch immediately, but neither did she yield to it. "Yes," she agreed simply. "You were. If I could unmake that error, but you cannot," she interrupted gently. "What's done is done. We live now with its consequences." "And yet you named him Alexander," Alaric pressed. "You gave him my name, even believing I would never know him." A flicker of emotion crossed her features, vulnerability swiftly contained. "I did not wish him to grow up believing himself entirely unclaimed by his father, even if that claim existed only in private recognition." Lucien's sounds grew more insistent, and Isolde withdrew her hand from Alaric's grasp. "He grows impatient," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Another trait inherited from his father. Left alone, Alaric moved to the window, watching as the village slowly emerged from beneath its snowy blanket. Fishermen cleared paths to their boats. Children ventured out to play in the transformed landscape, and smoke rose from chimneys in determined columns. Life continued, adapting to circumstances, rather than bending circumstances to will, a concept foreign to a man who had spent his existence assuming the world would conform to his expectations. When Isolde returned with Lucien freshly dressed for the day, Alaric had reached a decision that surprised even himself. "I wish to remain here," he announced without preamble. "Not merely until the road's clear, but longer. I wish to know my son. I wish to know the woman who has raised him alone these 6 months." Isolde's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts as she settled Lucien in a small basket lined with blankets. "To what purpose, Alaric? What do you imagine will result from such an arrangement?" "I do not know," he admitted, the uncertainty unfamiliar on his tongue. "I have lived a life of calculated certainties. This is uncharted territory." "Indeed," she straightened, regarding him with careful assessment. "And when you have satisfied your curiosity, when you have witnessed enough of our humble existence to ease your conscience, what then?" The question laid bare the fundamental imbalance between them. He could depart whenever he wished, returning to Ravencourt's opulent comforts, while she remained bound to the life she had constructed from necessity. "I do not seek to ease my conscience," Alaric replied after a moment's consideration. "Such ease would be undeserved and unwelcome. I seek—" He faltered, searching for words to express a concept still forming within him. "I seek understanding. Of him, of you, of what might be possible beyond the ruins I created." A knock at the door interrupted whatever response Isolde might have offered. Lady Doran entered without waiting for invitation, her expression unusually grave. "Mr. Halloway has received urgent correspondence from London," she announced without preamble. "Lord Harrington has begun making inquiries regarding the Duke's unexpected absence." Alaric stiffened at the name. Lord Harrington, his cousin and heir presumptive to the Blackmere title before Lucien's birth. The man who stood to gain most from the scandal that had separated Alaric from Isolde. "What nature of inquiries?" he asked, his voice unconsciously reverting to the clipped authority of his public persona. "He has written to your secretary demanding information about your whereabouts," Lady Doran replied. "The letter hints at concern for your well-being, though Mr. Halloway believes the true motive less benevolent." "Harrington," Isolde murmured, a shadow crossing her features. He was most solicitous during the divorce proceedings, almost eager in his sympathy. The implication hung in the air between them, unvoiced yet unmistakable. Alaric felt cold realization spread through him as disparate pieces aligned in his mind. Harrington's convenient appearance during the height of the scandal, his subtle encouragement of Alaric's wounded pride, his careful reinforcement of the evidence against Isolde. He orchestrated it, Alaric said slowly, the truth crystallizing with terrible clarity. The rumors, the supposed witnesses to your infidelity, all calculated to ensure our separation. And with it, to secure his position as your heir, Lady Doran concluded grimly, a scheme now threatened by Lucien's existence. Isolde moved instinctively to the basket where her son lay, her protective posture communicating more than words could express. "He cannot touch us here," she said, though uncertainty tinged her voice. "We are beyond his reach." "For the moment," Lady Doran agreed. "But should word reach him of the child's existence, of the Duke's presence in Brionne, I fear his response would be swift and potentially dangerous." "He shall not know," Alaric declared, decision hardening within him. "Not until I have gathered evidence of his treachery and ensured Lucien's legal standing is unassailable." Lady Doran studied him with shrewd assessment. "Then you intend to acknowledge the boy publicly?" "I intend," Alaric replied, moving to stand beside Isolde and the child, "to restore what should never have been broken, if Mrs. Merrow will permit it." The formality of his address, Mrs. Merrow rather than Isolde, underlined the gravity of his declaration. This was no impulsive gesture, but a considered reversal of his most consequential decision. Isolde's gaze searched his face, looking for any trace of doubt or calculation. "And if I do not permit it?" she asked quietly. "If I choose to maintain our separate lives?" It was the question he had most feared, yet knew he must answer with complete honesty. "Then I shall respect your decision," Alaric replied, "while doing everything within my power to ensure both your safety and Lucien's rightful inheritance. I have failed you once through pride and hasty judgment. I will not compound that failure through further impositions of my will." Something shifted in Isolde's expression, not quite softening, but a subtle alteration that suggested reassessment. "You have changed," she observed. "Necessity rather than virtue," he acknowledged ruefully. "Though perhaps change, regardless of its catalyst, may yet prove worthwhile." Lady Doran cleared her throat delicately. "If I might suggest, the immediate concern remains Lord Harrington's inquiries. Mr. Halloway believes he may send representatives to Ravencourt within the week, if no satisfactory explanation for your Grace's absence is provided." "Then we shall provide one," Alaric decided. "Have Mr. Halloway draft a letter to my secretary, stating that I have undertaken a private retreat for matters of health and reflection following the anniversary of my grandmother's passing. The timing aligns sufficiently to appear plausible." "And if Harrington persists," Lady Doran pressed. "Then he reveals the urgency of his interest," Alaric replied, "and with it his hand in this affair. For now, we must use this enforced isolation to determine our course forward, assuming," he added, glancing at Isolde, "that you are willing to consider such a joint endeavor." Lucien chose that moment to emit a sound somewhere between contentment and demand, drawing all attention to his small form. In the quiet of the snowbound cottage, with danger and decision hanging equally in the balance, his innocent presence served as reminder of what truly warranted protection. "I will consider it," Isolde said at last, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. Not for the sake of titles or inheritances, but for him, always for him. The following days unfolded in a curious domestic rhythm, unlike anything Alaric had previously experienced. Snowbound in the cottage, removed from the elaborate machinery of his ducal existence, he found himself participating in the mundane miracles of daily life. He learned to heat Lucien's bottles to the precise temperature required, to distinguish between cries of hunger and discomfort, to support the infant's head during bathing with appropriate care. "You possess unexpected aptitude for these tasks," Isolde observed on the third evening, watching as Alaric successfully settled Lucien for sleep, the child's tiny form curled trustingly against his father's chest. "I find myself equally surprised," he admitted, his voice hushed to avoid disturbing the sleeping infant. "At Ravencourt I scarcely interact with any process requiring physical engagement. Everything is arranged, prepared, completed by others." "And is that arrangement satisfying?" she asked, genuine curiosity evident in her tone. Alaric considered the question with unaccustomed honesty. It was never a matter of satisfaction, he replied after a moment, merely expectation. The Duke does not change linens or prepare meals or walk the floor with a fractious infant. It would be unseemly. Unseemly, Isolde echoed, a ghost of amusement touching her lips. Like the Duke kneeling to tend a fire as you did this morning, or the Duke assisting with the washing up after breakfast. Precisely, he agreed, matching her faint smile with one of his own. Utterly scandalous behavior. My valet would require smelling salts were he to witness such degradation of rank. The gentle teasing, reminiscent of their early marriage before position and propriety, had calcified their interactions, created a momentary warmth between them that transcended the heat from the hearth. He's fully asleep, Isolde murmured, reaching to take Lucien. I shall put him down properly. As she settled the child in his cradle, Alaric found himself studying her with new appreciation. The woman before him was both familiar and foreign, the same elegant profile, the same grace of movement, yet altered by experiences he had not shared. Motherhood had transformed her in subtle ways, adding layers of confidence and purpose to her inherent strength. Mr. Halloway will return tomorrow, she said as she rejoined him by the fire. Lady Doran is most insistent that we finalize the legal arrangements concerning Lucien. And what do you wish regarding those arrangements? Alaric asked, determined to honor his promise that her voice would hold equal weight in decisions concerning their son. Isolde was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed upon the dancing flames. I wish for his security, she said finally. Not merely financial provision, but emotional certainty. I will not have him raised between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. You speak as though reconciliation between those worlds is impossible, Alaric observed carefully. She turned to him then, her eyes reflecting both firelight and caution. Is it not? You are the Duke of Blackmere, bound to Ravencourt and all it represents. I am Mrs. Merrow, a divorced woman residing in a coastal cottage. These are not circumstances easily reconciled. Circumstances can change, he suggested, if those involved desire change strongly enough. And do you desire such change, Alaric? She asked, her voice softening. Truly. Beyond the initial shock of discovering Lucien, beyond this isolated interlude where normal constraints do not apply, would you genuinely seek a future different from the one you chose 6 months ago? The question demanded absolute honesty. Anything less would be an insult to her intelligence and their shared history. Alaric found himself navigating unfamiliar emotional territory without the compass of social convention to guide him. 6 months ago, he began carefully, I believed I was upholding family honor by severing ties with a woman who had betrayed me. I was certain of my course, convinced of its righteousness. He paused, gathering thoughts still forming as he spoke them. Now I find that certainty was built upon lies. What I defended was not honor but pride, and a blind, foolish pride at that. That does not answer my question, Isolde pressed gently. It forms the foundation of my answer, Alaric replied. For if my decision then was based on falsehood, might not a different decision now be possible based on truth? A log shifted in the fire, sending a cascade of sparks upward. Outside the wind had quieted, and the silence of deep snow enveloped the cottage in muffled isolation. What truth would that be? Isolde asked, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. Alaric reached across the space between them, his hand hovering just short of touching hers. That I have never stopped loving you, he said simply. That even believing you unfaithful, I could not excise you from my heart, though pride demanded I try. The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical contact could have been. Isolde did not withdraw, but neither did she bridge the final distance between their hands. Love is not always sufficient, she observed, though her voice held no rejection. There are practical considerations, your position, the expectations of society, the harm already inflicted, that cannot be simply undone. All true, Alaric acknowledged, yet I find myself increasingly convinced that those considerations, while significant, need not be insurmountable. And how would you surmount them? She challenged, though there was more curiosity than skepticism in her tone. Before he could respond, the cottage door opened, admitting a gust of cold air and Lady Doran, returning from her evening meeting with Mr. Halloway at the village inn. The solicitor has prepared revised documents, she announced, unwinding her scarf with practiced efficiency. Less presumptuous than his earlier draft, I believe. He awaits your convenience tomorrow morning. She paused, glancing between them, clearly sensing the intimate conversation she had interrupted. I trust I am not intruding upon significant discussions. Merely preliminary explorations, Alaric replied, withdrawing his hand from its suspended position near Isolde's. Nothing yet requiring formal documentation. Lady Doran's shrewd gaze missed nothing. I see, she murmured, though her tone suggested she saw considerably more than was being openly acknowledged. Then perhaps I might offer an observation before retiring for the evening. By all means, Isolde said, her composure restored though a faint flush remained upon her cheeks. In my considerable experience, Lady Doran began, settling into the armchair with regal assurance, I have observed that society's memory is remarkably selective. Scandals that seem insurmountable in the moment often fade to insignificance when confronted with new circumstances, or more effectively, with unified dignity. You suggest the divorce scandal could be overcome? Alaric asked, intrigued despite his skepticism. I suggest, Lady Doran corrected precisely, that a narrative of reconciliation following grievous misunderstanding, particularly when that reconciliation includes the heartwarming discovery of a previously unknown heir, offers society an opportunity to embrace romantic redemption rather than dwell on past impropriety. Isolde's expression remained guarded. You make it sound remarkably straightforward. Not straightforward, Lady Doran amended. Strategic. The Tun adores nothing more than a love story that overcomes adversity, particularly when that story involves a duke and restoration of proper succession. She paused, her gaze sharpening. And when that story preempts another, less savory tale involving attempted manipulation of inheritance by unscrupulous relatives. The reference to Lord Harrington's machinations was unmistakable. Alaric found himself reluctantly impressed by Lady Doran's political acumen. She had correctly identified both the emotional and tactical advantages of a reconciliation narrative. Such strategies, he observed, presume willing participants in the reconciliation you describe. Lady Doran rose, preparing to retire to her chamber. Indeed they do, Your Grace, which is why I shall leave you to continue your preliminary explorations without further interruption. At the doorway she paused, adding with uncharacteristic gentleness, though I would suggest that opportunities for genuine happiness occur rarely enough in this life that dismissing them due to social complications seems a particular form of tragedy. After her departure, silence settled between Alaric and Isolde once more. The fire had burned lower, casting the room in soft amber light that softened edges and created an intimacy both comforting and dangerous. She makes a compelling case, Alaric ventured at last. For a strategic alliance, Isolde noted, a hint of wariness entering her voice. Is that how you perceive my earlier words? He asked, genuine concern evident in his tone. As strategy, rather than truth. She studied him, her gaze searching for any trace of calculation or insincerity. I do not know what to perceive, Alaric. 6 months ago, you believed the worst of me without question. Now you speak of love unchanged, despite that belief. These are not easily reconciled positions. No, he agreed quietly. They are not, and yet both are true. I believed you unfaithful, because Harrington presented evidence that seemed incontrovertible. I signed our divorce papers with a hand that trembled not from doubt, but from grief. And through these months of separation I have moved through my life like a man half present, fulfilling duties, maintaining appearances, while something essential remained absent. Isolde's expression softened almost imperceptibly. You never remarried. How could I? Alaric responded simply. The thought was unbearable. A small sound from the nursery interrupted the moment, not Lucienne fully waking, but the restless shifting of an infant briefly disturbed in sleep. Both parents instinctively turned toward the sound, their shared concern creating a bridge where words had faltered. He settles himself now. Most nights, Isolde murmured. Learning self-soothing, Doctor. Merriweather calls it. A valuable skill at any age, Alaric observed with gentle self-deprecation, one I might have benefited from cultivating more thoroughly. This drew a genuine smile from Isolde, small but unguarded. The Duke of Blackmere admits to imperfection. Truly, these are remarkable times. Remarkable indeed, he agreed, returning her smile with his own, though perhaps overdue. In the quiet that followed, something shifted between them, not resolution, but possibility. The chasm created by scandal and separation remained, yet a fragile bridge had begun to form across its expanse. It grows late, Isolde said at last, rising from her chair. Tomorrow brings Mr. Halloway, and decisions that cannot be postponed indefinitely. Alaric stood as well, maintaining a respectful distance despite his desire to close it. "Then let us face those decisions with clear minds," he suggested. "And perhaps, if you are willing, with open consideration of possibilities beyond those we have previously entertained." She paused at the threshold of her chamber, the soft glow of her candle illuminating features both familiar and newly discovered. "I will consider all possibilities," she agreed quietly. "For Lucien's sake, certainly. And perhaps," she added, her voice softening further, "for other reasons as well." With that she withdrew, leaving Alaric standing before the dying fire, hope kindling within him more warming than any physical flame could provide. Spring arrived at Brion with tentative grace, coaxing crocuses from frost-hardened earth, and tempering the bitter coastal winds with hints of forthcoming warmth. The cottage garden, dormant through winter's grip, now stirred with new growth, delicate shoots of green pushing upward with determined optimism. Isolde knelt among newly turned soil. Lucien settled beside her on a blanket, his 7 months of life having transformed him from newborn fragility to robust curiosity. He watched his mother's gardening efforts with solemn attention, occasionally reaching toward passing butterflies with determined if uncoordinated gestures. "So your son appears to have developed horticultural interests," observed Alaric, approaching from the cottage with tea tray balanced with careful precision, a domestic skill acquired over months of practice. "He appreciates beauty in all forms," Isolde replied, accepting the tea he offered. "A trait inherited from his father, I believe." The easy exchange, warm with affection and absent of tension, reflected the gradual transformation of their relationship over the winter months. What had begun as cautious negotiation regarding Lucien's future had evolved into something neither had dared anticipate, a genuine rebuilding of trust, respect, and eventually tentative joy in each other's company. Alaric settled beside them on the blanket, immediately capturing Lucien's attention. The child's face illuminated with recognition, tiny arms extending in imperious demand to be lifted. "Ever commanding," Alaric murmured with evident pride as he complied with his son's wordless request. "The vain temperament makes itself known early." "Balanced by the marrow thoughtfulness," Isolde countered, watching as Lucien immediately settled against his father's chest with contented security. "He observes before acting, even in his determination." The domestic tableau, Duke, former Duchess, and their child enjoying simple companionship in a cottage garden, would have seemed impossible 6 months prior. Yet here they sat, the elaborate architecture of aristocratic constraint gradually dismantled by proximity, necessity, and rediscovered affection. "The letter from Ravencourt arrived this morning," Alaric mentioned, his tone deliberately casual, though the subject was anything but. "Harrington has intensified his inquiries regarding my prolonged absence." Isolde's expression sobered. "He grows suspicious." "Increasingly so." Alaric shifted Lucien to a more comfortable position against his shoulder. "My secretary reports that he has begun making thinly veiled insinuations in certain social circles, suggesting my retreat indicates instability or perhaps even diminished capacity. Laying groundwork to challenge your authority should the truth emerge," Isolde concluded, her political acumen as sharp as ever despite months removed from society's machinations. "Precisely." Alaric reached across the blanket to take her hand, the gesture natural now where once it had been fraught with uncertainty. "Which means our decision can no longer be delayed, Isolde, for Lucien's protection, if nothing else." She did not withdraw from his touch, but her gaze turned toward the horizon where sea met sky in distant convergence. "You are certain this is what you wish? The path forward will not be easily traveled, regardless of Lady Doran's strategic optimism." "I have never been more certain of anything," Alaric replied with quiet conviction. "The question remains whether you share that certainty." The months of their reconnection had progressed with deliberate patience. Alaric had divided his time between necessary appearances at Ravencourt and extended stays at Brion, gradually integrating himself into the life Isolde had constructed for herself and their son. They had moved from guarded politeness to genuine companionship, from separate chambers to tentative intimacy, from wounded past to cautious future. Yet the final step, the public declaration that would irrevocably alter their circumstances, remained untaken. "Mr. Holloway has prepared the documents," Isolde said after a thoughtful pause. "They await only your signature to begin proceedings." "Not my signature alone," Alaric corrected gently. "This must be our decision, freely made and jointly executed." A butterfly, delicate wings patterned in blue and amber, alighted briefly on Lucien's outstretched hand. The child's expression of wonder drew smiles from both parents, a shared moment of simple joy that transcended the complexities surrounding them. "I never imagined this possibility," Isolde admitted, watching as the butterfly resumed its aerial dance above the garden. "When you signed our divorce papers, I believed that chapter of my life concluded with absolute finality." "As did I," Alaric acknowledged. "In my pride and wounded vanity, I thought severance the only honorable course." "And now?" she prompted, her gaze returning to his face. "Now I understand that true honor lies not in rigid adherence to social expectation, but in the courage to acknowledge error and seek restoration." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss upon her fingers. "I have learned this lesson through watching you, Isolde. Your dignity in adversity, your unwavering devotion to our son, your capacity for forgiveness despite every justification for bitterness." Lucien, growing restless with adult conversation, began to squirm in his father's arms. Alaric released him carefully onto the blanket, where he immediately focused on a colorful pebble with absorbing interest. "Lady Doran believes society will embrace the romantic narrative of our reconciliation," Isolde observed, a hint of skepticism coloring her tone, "that the discovery of an heir born after our separation will transform scandal into sentiment. Lady Doran possesses shrewd understanding of the ton's capricious affections," Alaric agreed, "though I find myself increasingly indifferent to their judgment, whether favorable or otherwise." This declaration, so contrary to the man who had once valued social standing above all else, drew a surprised laugh from Isolde. "The Duke of Blackmere, indifferent to society's opinion? Truly, miracles abound." "The true miracle," he countered with gentle seriousness, "sits before me on this blanket. Both of you who have granted me opportunity for redemption I scarcely deserve." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the ambient music of coastal spring, distant waves rustling new leaves, Lucien's contented babbling as he explored his surroundings. "If we proceed," Isolde said at length, "there can be no half measures, no secret arrangements or conditional reconciliations. Lucien deserves parents united in more than legal documentation." "I would have it no other way," Alaric assured her. "What I propose, what I hope you will consider, is true restoration, not merely of your title and position, but of the promise we made to each other before witnesses and God. Marriage," she clarified, testing the word's weight, "a second beginning. With eyes fully opened," he affirmed, "and hearts perhaps wiser for having known separation's bitter taste." Isolde studied him with the careful assessment that had always seen beyond his ducal facade to the man beneath. "And Harrington? He will not simply accept this development without challenge." "Let him challenge," Alaric replied with quiet determination. "The evidence of his deception grows more substantial with each correspondence Mr. Halloway uncovers. His desperation reveals his guilt." Lucien chose that moment to achieve a long-attempted goal, rolling from back to stomach with triumphant effort. Both parents instinctively reached to steady him, their hands meeting in the process. The simple, synchronized movement embodied the partnership they had begun to rebuild, tentative at first, then increasingly natural. "We would reside at Ravencourt?" Isolde asked, practical considerations surfacing as she contemplated tangible implications of the abstract decision. "As befits our position," Alaric confirmed, "though I find myself unwilling to relinquish this cottage entirely, perhaps as a summer retreat, where Lucien might grow acquainted with simpler pleasures than ducal life typically affords." The consideration, so unlike the man who had once disdained any residence lacking proper grandeur, further illustrated the transformation of recent months. Alaric had discovered in Brionne's modest comforts a peace Ravencourt's opulence had never provided, a realization that had humbled and expanded him in equal measure. "Lady Doran will be insufferably pleased with herself," Isolde observed, a smile softening her features. "A small price for her invaluable meddling," Alaric conceded. "Without her intervention, I might never have known of Lucien's existence." "Without her intervention, we might have continued in separate lives indefinitely," Isolde added softly. "For better or worse." "I cannot believe it would have been for better," Alaric replied, his voice equally gentle. "Not having witnessed the alternative these past months, the spring sun emerging from behind passing clouds illuminated the garden in golden warmth. Lucien, having mastered his new rolling skill, repeated the achievement with evident satisfaction, his joyful sounds drawing fond attention from both parents. "The simplest pleasures," Isolde murmured, often prove the most profound. Alaric reached for her hand once more, his touch conveying more than words could express. Is that a yes, Isolde? Will you join me in this new beginning? She turned to face him fully, spring light catching the silver gold of her hair and the clarity in her eyes. It is a yes, she confirmed, though not without conditions. Name them, he responded immediately. That we proceed with honesty between us always, no matter how difficult the truth may prove. That Lucien's well-being remains our paramount consideration in all decisions. That we remember, even when restored to Ravencourt's grandeur, the lessons learned in this humble cottage. I pledge all this and more, Alaric vowed, lifting her hand to his heart, before God and our son as witnesses. Then yes, Isolde said simply, her voice steady with conviction. I will rebuild what was broken, not merely for Lucien's sake, but for our own. The kiss they shared, witnessed only by butterflies and their observant son, sealed the decision with gentle affirmation. When they parted, Isolde's eyes held both certainty and gentle challenge. We should begin preparations immediately, she said. If Harrington's suspicions grow, we must present our unified truth before he can spread further falsehoods. Mr. Halloway awaits our instructions, Alaric agreed, and Lady Doran has maintained correspondence with select allies in London who will assist in smoothing our return to society. Lucien, having exhausted the novelty of rolling, expressed his growing hunger with increasingly insistent sounds. Isolde gathered him into her arms with practiced ease, her movements synchronized with Alaric's, as they rose together from the garden blanket. A new chapter begins, she observed, as they walked toward the cottage, the three of them together forming a picture of family harmony that had seemed impossible 6 months prior. Not merely a chapter, Alaric corrected gently, an entirely new volume, written with wisdom the previous lacked. As they crossed the threshold into the cottage that had witnessed their painful reunion and gradual healing, spring light followed them inside, illuminating not the end of a journey, but the promising commencement of one far richer than either could have imagined when winter's snow first sealed them within these walls. Behind them, the blue door, faded by salt and weather, yet standing firm against coastal elements, closed gently on the past as they stepped forward into a future reunited. In the silence between heartbeats, life offers its most profound lessons, lessons of pride humbled, of love tested, of redemption found in unlikely corners. The Duke of Blackmere discovered what many souls learn too late, that titles and estates amount to hollow grandeur when measured against the authentic wealth of family bonds. It is not our moments of certainty that define us, but our response to life's unexpected revelations. When faced with evidence of our gravest errors, do we cling to pride's cold comfort, or do we find the courage to rebuild what falsehood has destroyed? The truest nobility lies not in bloodlines or inheritance, but in the willingness to kneel before love and acknowledge our deepest mistakes. For Alaric and Isolde, winter's enforced isolation became the crucible in which genuine connection was reforged, stronger for having known separation's bitter taste. Their journey reminds us that forgiveness is not merely the absence of anger, but the active choice to begin anew, eyes wide open to both past wounds and future possibilities. Perhaps the most beautiful truth revealed in their story is that second chances often arrive disguised as complications, wrapped in circumstances we neither expected nor initially welcomed. The sealed letter that disrupted the Duke's carefully ordered existence contained not just news of an heir, but the invitation to reclaim his humanity from beneath the weight of position and expectation. May we all learn, as they did, that love's restoration requires not grand gestures but patient rebuilding. One honest conversation, one vulnerable admission, one shared moment of wonder at a time. Call to action. Did this tale of redemption through humility and love renewed against all odds touch your heart? Every journey from pride to genuine connection resonates differently for each listener. Perhaps you recognized yourself in Alaric's stubborn certainty, or in Isolde's protective strength, or even in Lady Doran's determined meddling for greater good. Share your reflections in the comments below. What moment in their story most deeply moved you? When did you first believe reconciliation might be possible between them? Subscribe to our channel to journey through more tales of hearts lost and found again, of mistakes that seemed irreparable until love proved otherwise. Each story we share explores the infinite ways human connection transforms us, if only we have courage to embrace its possibilities. Remember, The most profound love stories are rarely those that progress without obstacle, but rather those where hearts find their way back to each other through fog of misunderstanding and pride's treacherous terrain. Like the Duke and his estranged wife, sometimes our greatest beginnings await on the other side of what we believed was ending.